The clatter of dishes and the low hum of after-work chatter were the soundtrack of Juniper's life. She moved between the red vinyl booths of the Moonlight Diner like a ghost, a tray balanced on her palm. To most customers, she was just a pair of hands that brought coffee and pie, a face they never really looked at. She was used to being invisible, a skill she'd perfected over years of blending into the background. But Juniper noticed everything. The way a couple held hands a little too tightly, the tired slump of a trucker's shoulders, the fake cheer in a lonely regular's voice. She saw the world in its tiny, telling details. The bell above the door jingled, cutting through the diner's warmth. Two men stepped out of the chilly evening, and the air in the room seemed to shift and cool. The first was broad-shouldered and serious, his eyes scanning the room with a practiced, watchful intensity. This was Reese. He held himself like a shield. But it was the man behind him who stole the very breath from Juniper's lungs. He was tall, with an elegant grace that seemed out of place among the chipped formica and neon signs. His name was Cashin. He moved with a quiet power, a king entering a common tavern, yet his dark eyes held a shadow of weariness. He wore a simple black coat that looked impossibly expensive, and when he shrugged it off, the sharp lines of his suit jacket made him look both powerful and tragically untouchable. He slid into a corner booth, the one shrouded in the most shadow, and Reese took the seat facing the door, his back straight, a silent sentinel. Juniper's heart did a funny little flip-flop against her ribs. She forced her feet to move, grabbing her notepad and approaching their table. The scent of Cashin's cologne, something like sandalwood and stormy air, hit her as she got closer. It was dizzying. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice thankfully steady. Reese ordered 2 black coffees, his tone clipped, his eyes never still. Cashin didn't speak. He merely gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his gaze fixed on the salt shaker as if it held the answers to a deep, personal mystery. Juniper felt a strange pang, a desire to know what thoughts lay behind those brooding eyes. She brought their coffees, the ceramic mugs clinking softly as she set them down. It was then, as she turned to leave, that she saw it. A detail so small, so easy to miss. Cashin reached for his mug. His hand, which had looked so strong and capable, was trembling. Not a shiver, but a fine, uncontrollable tremor that made the dark liquid swirl precariously close to the rim. He curled his fingers, trying to stop it, a flicker of frustration crossing his handsome face. Juniper paused, her waitress instincts warring with a sudden, sharp concern. She watched him take a hesitant sip. A sheen of sweat, glistening under the diner's dim lights, had broken out on his pale forehead. He blinked slowly, his focus seeming to drift in and out. He looked lost, adrift in a way that had nothing to do with the noisy diner. Reese, however, was staring out the window, watching the rain begin to patter against the glass, completely unaware of the silent battle happening just across the table. "Something is wrong," Juniper's mind screamed. This wasn't just tiredness. A memory, sharp and clear, sliced through her panic. Her little cousin, at a family picnic, had eaten a cookie with a hidden nut. He'd gotten the same confused look, the same strange paleness, before his lips had started to swell. Anaphylaxis, the paramedic had called it. A race against time. Her feet were moving before her brain could talk her out of it. The rules, don't bother important-looking customers, don't make a scene, evaporated. She walked right up to their table, her apron stained with coffee and ketchup, her heart hammering a wild, frantic rhythm against her ribs. She ignored Reese, whose attention had snapped to her the moment she invaded their space. All her focus was on Cashin. He looked up, and for a heart-stopping second, his dark, clouded eyes locked with hers. The world narrowed to just the two of them. There was a vulnerability there, a silent plea she felt deep in her soul. "Sir," she said, her voice soft but urgent, cutting through the low hum of the diner. She leaned in slightly, close enough to catch that intoxicating scent of sandalwood mixed with the sharp, sour tang of sweat. "Please, listen to me. You're not well. I think you need a doctor. Right now." Cashin's brow furrowed, as if trying to place her from a dream. He opened his mouth to speak, to dismiss her, but no sound came out. His eyes widened in sudden, dawning horror, not at her, but at the invisible enemy closing his throat. Rhys was half out of his seat, his hand moving inside his jacket. "Step away from him," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. It was too late. A strangled, guttural sound escaped Cashin's lips. His body went rigid, his shoulders slamming back against the vinyl booth. The coffee mug slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the table with a crack, sending a dark river of liquid spilling across the formica. Then, in a horrifying, slow-motion collapse, his body slid sideways, crumpling onto the worn checkerboard floor. Chaos erupted. A woman at the counter screamed. Rhys was on his knees in an instant, his professional cool shattered, his face a mask of raw panic. He was shouting Cashin's name, shaking his shoulder, completely lost. "Cashin! Boss! Talk to me!" But Juniper's world had gone quiet and clear. She dropped to the floor beside him, the sticky floor clinging to her knees. She didn't see the powerful son of a dangerous man. She saw a person who was dying. "It's an allergic reaction," she said to Rhys, her voice astonishingly calm, a rock in the storm. "A severe one. Is there an EpiPen? Does he carry one?" Rhys stared at her, his mind blank with terror. He fumbled through Cashin's jacket pockets, his own hands shaking now. "Nothing. Call an ambulance." Juniper yelled over her shoulder to the stunned cook. "No. Tell them it's anaphylactic shock." She turned back to Cashin. His lips were turning a terrifying shade of blue. Her own fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but her hands were steady. She tilted his head back, checking his airway, her fingers brushing against the stubble on his jaw. His skin was cold and clammy. "Stay with me," she whispered, her face close to his. "They're coming. Just hold on." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing rapidly louder. The flashing red and blue lights painted the diner's windows in frantic strokes. The paramedics burst in, a whirlwind of efficiency, pushing Juniper and Rhys aside. They worked quickly, injecting him with epinephrine, fitting an oxygen mask over his nose and mouth. As they lifted his limp body onto the stretcher, a miracle happened. The powerful medicine surged through his veins, fighting back the darkness. Cashin's eyelids fluttered. His gaze, weak and hazy, swept across the frantic scene until it found her. Juniper was standing there, her hands clasped tightly under her chin, her whole body trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. Their eyes met. In that single, electric moment, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. There was confusion, a dawning recognition, and a profound, soul-deep gratitude. As they wheeled him past, his hand, which had been lying limp at his side, moved. With a tremendous effort, his fingers stretched out, brushing against her hand. He didn't just touch her. His weak, cold fingers curled, managing a faint, deliberate squeeze. Then he was gone, rushed out into the rain and into the waiting ambulance, leaving Juniper standing alone in the middle of the chaotic diner. The spot on her hand where his fingers had rested burned like a brand. The ghost of his touch, the storm in his eyes, and the terrifying nearness of his death were seared into her memory. The invisible girl had been seen, and in seeing, she had saved a king. And she knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that her quiet, predictable life was over. The week after the diner incident passed in a blur of routine and restless energy for Juniper. Every clatter of a dish, every jingle of the doorbell, made her heart leap into her throat. She found herself staring at the corner booth, the ghost of Cashin's collapse replaying behind her eyes. The memory of his faint, cold hand squeezing hers was a brand on her skin, a secret she carried through her shifts. She was sure she would never see him again. He was a prince from a shadowy kingdom, and she was just the girl who'd briefly stepped into his path. She was wiping down the counter long after her shift had ended, the diner empty and silent, when the bell chimed again. Her head snapped up. He was there. Cashin stood just inside the door, the rain from a week ago replaced by a clear, starry night framing him through the glass. He looked different. The terrifying paleness was gone, replaced by a healthy, warm glow. He wore a simple dark sweater and trousers, looking less like a king and more like a man, but the power in his stance was undeniable. Beside him, a step behind as always, was Reese, whose usual stern expression seemed to have softened by a single, grudging degree. "We're closed," Juniper said, her voice a fragile thing in the quiet room. "I'm not here for coffee," Cashin replied. His voice was deeper than she remembered, a rich, smooth sound that washed over her. He took a few steps forward, until only the counter separated them. His dark eyes, now clear and intensely focused, held hers. "I'm here for you." Juniper's breath hitched. She clutched the damp cloth in her hand, her knuckles turning white. "You saved my life," he said, the words simple and heavy with meaning. "The doctors said another minute, well." He shook his head as if to dispel the dark thought. "It wasn't an accident, Juniper. It was poison. Someone put something in my food before I arrived at the diner. Your quick thinking, your bravery, you saw what everyone else, including my most trusted friend, missed." He glanced at Reese, who gave a slight, apologetic nod. Poison. The word hung in the air, sinister and cold. It confirmed the dangerous world he lived in, a world of shadows and enemies. It should have terrified her, sent her running. But all she felt was a fierce, protective surge. I just did what anyone would have done," she whispered. "No," Cashin said, his voice firm, his gaze piercing. "No one else did. Only you." He invited her to dinner. A proper thank you, he called it. A voice in her head, the one that valued safety and a predictable life, screamed at her to say no. But the memory of his hand in hers, the look in his eyes as he lay on the floor, was louder. She heard herself say yes. That first dinner was at a restaurant where the lights were low and the silverware gleamed. Juniper felt like a fish out of water, but Cashin never made her feel that way. He asked her questions, about her life, her dreams, the books she loved, and he actually listened to her answers. He made her feel fascinating. In return, he was guarded, but he offered her small, precious pieces of himself. He told her he loved classical art, that he painted landscapes in secret to quiet his mind, and that his favorite sound was rain on a tin roof. It became a secret rhythm. Reese would pick her up in a discreet, dark car after her shift. They would go to quiet, hidden places, a small gallery showcasing a forgotten artist, a private garden closed to the public, a jazz club where the music was a low, thrumming heartbeat. They were always watching, always careful. The danger was a constant, uninvited guest, but it only made their time together feel more precious, more intense. He was a man of contrasts. He could command a room with a single look, yet he held doors open for her with an old-world courtesy. His hands, which she knew could wield terrible power, were incredibly gentle. One night, he drove her up a winding road to a hill that overlooked the entire city. The lights twinkled below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The air was cool and clean, a world away from the greasy smell of the diner. They stood in silence, shoulders almost touching, the space between them humming with a tension that was both thrilling and terrifying. "It's beautiful," Juniper breathed. Cashin turned to look at her, not at the view. "It is," he said, his voice low. She felt his gaze and turned to meet it. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes, making them look like star-filled skies. He reached out, and his fingers, warm and sure, brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was so light, yet it sent a jolt of lightning through her entire body, leaving a trail of fire on her skin. She shuddered, a small, involuntary gasp escaping her lips. He didn't pull away. His thumb gently stroked her cheekbone, his eyes searching hers, asking a silent question. The world narrowed to his touch, his scent, the quiet intensity of his face. The hum between them grew into a roar in her ears. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in. Their first kiss was not one of hunger, but of discovery. It was soft, achingly slow, a tentative meeting of two worlds. His lips were warm and firm against hers, a perfect, gentle fit. It was a kiss full of unspoken promises, of safety, of desire, of a connection so profound it scared them both. When he finally pulled back, just an inch, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, their ragged breaths mingling in the cool night air. No words were needed. Everything had changed. After that, their secret meetings were filled with a new, intoxicating intimacy. The goodnight kisses at her doorstep were no longer brief pecks. They were lingering, deep explorations that made her knees weak and her head spin. He would press her gently against her front door, his strong arms caging her in, his body a solid, warm wall against hers. She would wind her fingers into his soft, dark hair, pulling him closer, losing herself in the taste of him, the feel of him. In the dark sanctuary of his car, he would hold her, her head resting on his shoulder, his chin on her hair. They whispered in the quiet darkness, sharing stories from their childhood, their deepest fears, their most fragile hopes. He confessed his fear of the legacy he was born into. She confessed her dream of one day owning a little bookstore. He wasn't Cashin, the son of a powerful, dangerous man. He was just Cashin, the man who loved the rain and held her as if she were the most precious, breakable thing in the world. She was falling, deeper and faster than she ever thought possible. She saw it reflected in his eyes, the same dizzying, terrifying, wonderful freefall. They were two lost souls from opposite ends of the universe, who had found a home in each other's arms. In the quiet moments, wrapped in his embrace, the dangerous world outside faded away, and all that was left was the whisper of his promises and the forever she could feel blooming in her heart. The stolen moments of happiness felt like a dream, a beautiful, fragile bubble that Juniper knew couldn't last. The real world, Cashin's world, was one of shadows and sharp edges, and it was only a matter of time before it pierced their perfect sanctuary. The intrusion came not with a bang, but with a chilling silence. Cashin's texts, which had been a constant, warm presence throughout her days, stopped. The secret drives with Reese never came. For 3 agonizing days, there was nothing but a void where his love had been. Juniper felt the absence like a physical ache, a cold dread settling in the pit of her stomach. She knew. His world had finally found them. On the 4th day, he came to her. He didn't take her to a hilltop or a quiet gallery. He stood in the alley behind the diner, the setting sun casting long, grim shadows. He looked like he had in the diner that first night, pale, his eyes haunted, the weariness back in his soul. "Juniper," he began, his voice rough, as if he hadn't used it in days. He couldn't even look at her. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling, already knowing the answer. "My father, he knows about you." Cashin finally met her gaze, and the pain she saw there made her want to crumble. "He sees you as a weakness, a target, a common waitress who can be used to get to me." He spat the words, his father's venom still fresh. "He says I have to end this. For your safety. For the family's." He was pushing her away. She could see the terrible, heartbreaking effort it took. He was trying to build a wall between them with his own 2 hands, brick by painful brick. "So, that's it," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "After everything? You're just going to let him tell you who to love?" "It's not about letting him, Juniper. It's about keeping you alive," he exploded, his control shattering. He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration and fear pouring out. "You don't understand the people in my world. If they see you as a way to hurt me, they will not hesitate. They will take you, they will hurt you, and I couldn't live with that. It's over." The words were a physical blow. He turned to leave, his shoulders set in a line of finality. For a moment, the world went gray. The hope she had nurtured, the future she had painted in her mind with him, shattered into a million pieces. But as she watched his retreating back, something fierce and stubborn ignited within her. It was the same part of her that had seen the tremor in his hand when no one else did. The part that had knelt on a dirty diner floor and refused to let him go. "Cashin, stop." Her voice, strong and clear, echoed in the narrow alley. He froze, but didn't turn. She marched up to him, grabbing his arm and forcing him to face her. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes blazed with a fire he had never seen. "You don't get to make this choice for me," she said, her voice shaking with emotion but unwavering in its conviction. "You think your world is so dangerous? My world before you was empty. It was serving coffee and going home to a silent apartment. It was being invisible. You showed me what it feels like to be seen. To be loved. She took a shaky breath, her grip on his arm tightening. Your world is dangerous, Cashin. But my world is empty without you. And I am not afraid of any of it, if I am with you. Her words broke through the fortress he had built around his heart. They washed over him, not as a plea, but as a declaration. She wasn't a fragile thing to be protected and locked away. She was a warrior, his warrior, standing in a dirty alley and fighting for him with everything she had. The mask of cold resignation crumbled. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest, burying his face in her hair. God, Juniper, he choked out, his own body trembling. I can't lose you. Then don't, she whispered into his neck, holding him just as tightly. Fight for me. Fight for us. And he did. The confrontation with his father was not a shouting match, but a quiet, seismic shift in power. Cashin stood in the opulent, cold study, a room he had always feared, and looked the old man in the eye. Her name is Juniper, Cashin said, his voice calm and lethally steady. She is not a weakness. She is my strength. She saw death on my face and fought it back when everyone else was blind. She is not a phase or a distraction. She is my future. And if your world cannot accept her, then I will leave your world behind. He was choosing her. Not out of rebellion, but out of love. And for the first time, his father, a man who dealt in threats and violence, saw a force even he could not control. A son who had found something worth more than any legacy. A week later, Reese drove them to a private botanical garden, the air heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Cashin led her by the hand down a path lit by flickering lanterns until they reached a secluded clearing. And there, Juniper's breath caught in her throat. Hundreds of tiny, twinkling fairy lights were woven through the branches of an ancient willow tree, creating a canopy of shimmering stars. It was a piece of their hilltop, brought down to earth and made even more magical. Cashin turned to her, his face illuminated by the soft glow. He took both of her hands in his. Juniper, he began, his voice thick with emotion. You once told me you felt invisible. But from the moment I saw you, you were the only person I could see. You saw the real me, hidden behind the fear and the duty. You saw the man who was drowning, and you reached out your hand. He squeezed her hands, his eyes glistening. You saved my life that night in the diner. He slowly, deliberately, lowered himself to one knee. Juniper's hands flew to her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. He looked up at her, his love and devotion shining brighter than all the lights in the sky. Now, he whispered, pulling a simple, breathtaking diamond ring from his pocket. Will you make it worth living? Juniper, my love, my savior, my everything, will you marry me? There were no hesitations, no doubts. Only a soaring, perfect joy that filled every part of her soul. Yes, she cried, the word bursting forth on a wave of happy tears. Yes, Cashin, 1,000 times, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, a permanent promise. As he stood, he swept her into his arms, spinning her around under the twinkling lights. When he set her down, he cradled her face in his hands and kissed her. It was not like their first, gentle kiss or their many passionate ones. This was a kiss of forever. It was deep and passionate, and full of every unspoken vow, every shared dream, every battle they had won to reach this moment. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, a promise of a life built not on fear, but on a love that had stared into the darkness and refused to blink. They had chosen each other. Against the world, against the danger, against all odds. And in that kiss, under a canopy of man-made stars, they knew their forever had finally begun. Did this story of fierce love and brave choices make your heart race? If you believed in Juniper and Cashin's fight for their forever, then subscribe to the channel now. We have so many more stories of passion, danger, and unforgettable romance waiting just for you. We love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what you thought about Juniper's brave stand and Cashin's beautiful proposal. Are you Team Juniper? Let us know your thoughts down below.